Okay, so we can begin with doing 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3, 3. And then I'll do the salutation just one time. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the perfectly enlightened one. Okay, so we'll be continuing now our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses. We're in the Book of Fives. And now we come to Sutta number 48, which is actually a very practical sutta, which we can really apply to our everyday life in the world. And it deals with the topic of 5 situations, 5 conditions that cannot be obtained by, we could just say, by anybody in the world. The sutta mentions by an ascetic or Brahmin, but that's just the Indian background. Even by the devas, the deities, even Mara, the Lord of darkness, or Brahma, the divine being, or by anyone in the world. Let's just say by us, 5 things, 5 situations that we cannot avoid, situations that we virtually have to face in the world. And so these will be actually 5 that was presented somewhat in the form of simply a discourse, a exposition of the Dhamma, but you could take them as 5 themes for reflection, 5 themes for contemplation. And when we use these as themes for reflection or contemplation or meditation, when we do this persistently, regularly, it builds up the strength of mind so that we're able to face these situations with inner strength, with equanimity, with mental balance, and without falling into misery and dejection and despair. Okay, so what are these 5 situations? So first, the Buddha is going to present them concisely, the sort of, we call this udesa, the compressed teaching. Then he's going to elaborate upon them, the nidesa, the developed or elaborated teaching. So the sort of the summary or compressed teaching: may what is subject to old age not grow old. And so when we say what is subject to old age, we're referring primarily to ourselves. May I not grow old, but also, we impose this thought on those who are dear and beloved to ourselves. May my wife not grow old. May my husband not grow old. May my parents not grow old. May my children not grow old. May my friends not grow old. So, we don't want to grow old ourselves. We don't want our loved ones to grow old. But this is a situation, a condition that's simply unobtainable. Whatever comes into being, whoever is born, if they're going to live a full, normal lifespan, they're going to grow old and to meet the various infirmities, the weaknesses connected with old age. Okay, the next one. May what is subject to illness not fall ill. And so we live in a world in which there are many kinds of, once we acquire this human body, this body by its very nature is subject to various types of illness. It could be communicable illnesses, illnesses spread by viruses, by microbes of various kinds, and what they call the non-communicable illnesses. This would be the illnesses like heart disease, strokes, cancer, and so forth. So may what is subject to illness not fall ill. And also we could include under illness, not just sickness as such, but also the accidents and injuries. And so once we acquire this body is very vulnerable to attacks by other organisms as well as by inanimate objects. The very planet that we live on is subject to heat waves, which have devastating effect, floods, earthquakes, natural disasters of various kinds. And we ourselves, those who are close to us, might be negatively impacted by these illnesses and accidents. May what is subject to death not die. So we have this instinctive drive to go on living. We want to live forever, at least to extend our lifespan ever longer and longer. But even if we live to 100 years, 120 years, we're bound to die. Even the devas might have lifespans of thousands of years. They pass away from the deva world. The beings in the Brahma worlds, it said, can live for even for aeons, for world cycles, several, even hundreds of world cycles, but eventually their lifespan comes to an end. So everyone who is born has to face old age, likely to face illness, and bound to face death. So those are the first three themes for reflection. Then the fourth and the fifth, I have to admit, I don't see very clearly, either in the English translation or even in the Pali, a very clear difference between them. Okay, may what is subject to destruction not be destroyed, and may what is subject to loss not be lost. So these two seem to be very similar. In any case, we have a lot of personal possessions that we want to be preserve and protect, and those personal possessions can be destroyed or can be lost or perish in various ways. Yeah, maybe, I don't know if some of you know Heidi, the librarian here. She had a very, very beautiful bright blue car, and the color of blue is such a unique color that whenever I see a car driving by in the monastery at that bright blue, I know that Kaidi is here. And then just last week, she told me that she had parked the car outside her home. And the next day when she came out to start the car, somebody had drove into it and collided with the front of the car, and the car was destroyed. So lost the car. Yeah, but these two, maybe they're referring, there's another theme that the Buddha often mentions in connection with the reflections on old age, illness, and death. And so these two, maybe we could group them together under this other theme, which goes something like this: Sabehi me piyehi mana pehi nana bhavo vina bhavoti. That with all who are dear and beloved to myself, there must be parting and separation, or I must be parted and separated from everyone who is dear and beloved to myself, and from everything that is dear and beloved to myself. So in other words, even if I go on living, but those who are dear and beloved to myself, my relatives, my friends, my students, my teachers, all of them, I have to be at some point separated from them. Either they will pass away before I do, or I will pass away and have to leave them behind. So we have to be separated from everyone that we love. And I think that idea will become evident in the third sutta in this particular group, actually in both the second and the third suttas. Okay, now comes the elaboration of this concise teaching. And so the Buddha is going to develop this elaboration by a contrast between two types of people. One is called the Asuttava Putujana. This is the uninstructed worldly person. So this is a person who doesn't have any knowledge of the Dhamma, doesn't have any experience in the practice of the Dhamma, and just lives sort of completely governed by worldly aims, worldly desires, worldly projects. And so for this person, what is subject to old age grows old. So this person grows old. And when this happens, as he's growing old, he doesn't reflect that I am not the only one for whom what is subject to old age grows old, but for all beings in this world, what is subject to old age grows old. Yeah, I'm going to go quickly through the teaching in regard to the worldling, and then I'll elaborate when we come to the other person, which is the instructed noble disciple. So this person, when they grow old, they don't reflect that they are subject to old age. And so when they grow old, then they become overcome by sorrow, lamentation, they weep, and they become confused. And so in this way, the uninstructed worldling is said to be one pierced by the poisonous dart of sorrow. Okay, the same applies in the case of the uninstructed worldling, in the case of illness. So when the worldly person falls ill, they haven't strengthened their mind, fortified their mind by reflecting in advance that I am subject to illness. And so when they fall ill, maybe they think, why does this have to happen to me? Everybody else is healthy, but I am ill, or I got into this accident, or I got sick, but everybody else is healthy. So I must have some kind of curse hanging over me, or I must have accumulated so much bad karma in the past that I am the one who's fallen ill. And in this way, they become oppressed by the sorrow, by lamentation, weeping, and they get completely bewildered. Again, they're pierced by the dart of sorrow. Okay, then when they find themselves facing death, then it's just absolutely overwhelming, because we have a kind of almost inbuilt instinctual sense, an inherent sense that we're going to live forever. And so we see other people dying and we think, that's their misfortune. They happen to get in the wrong place at the wrong time. But even though intellectually we know that we're going to die, but when death sort of rears its head and stares us in the face, then we think this wasn't supposed to happen to me. I was supposed to go on living forever. And then we, in a sense, we fail the test, and then we fall complete victim to death. We become overpowered, not just by sorrow, but by terror and fear that now everything is coming to an end. I'm leaving behind everything and everyone to fall into this dark abyss of death. And so when you find yourself on the verge of death, then again, there comes not only sorrow and weeping and lamentation, but absolute fear and terror and panic. And then these two I'll sort of group together under the theme of losing those loved ones who one cherishes and hopes to hold on to forever, and losing the things, the objects that one cherishes and wishes to last. And so when the loved ones fall ill and pass away, or when your possessions get destroyed in some way, then you become overcome by sorrow, by weeping. Yeah, when I think about this, when I read this, then I think very sadly about the pictures that I've seen about the bombardments taking place now in Ukraine, where people have been living in these houses, for years, even 20, 30 years. Then the bomb comes, and fortunately they manage to escape themselves, but they look back on their home, and the homes are just reduced to rubble. The whole neighborhood is reduced to rubble. And I mean, it's not the case that one should be able to bear that with complete indifference or equanimity, but it's just some example of what happens when destructive powers are unleashed in this world, and how one can lose, just in the blink of an eye, lose one's home, all of one's possessions. Yeah, not only in Ukraine, also right here in the United States, with the floods that took place in Florida and in other parts of the US this past autumn. People lost all of their possessions. The home is completely flooded, can't live in the home anymore. The car is carried away by floodwaters. All of the possessions are inundated with water. And so people are standing after the floodwaters have subsided, and they're being interviewed by the news broadcaster, and they're saying, we don't have anything. We've lost everything. The only thing we have are our lives and the clothes on our body. And many of these people, because they're poor, usually poorer people, they don't even have insurance on their home or other possessions. So that is the nature of life in this world. Okay, so this is what happens in the case of the uninstructed worldling, pierced by the poisonous dart of sorrow. Okay, now we come to, so that's we call this the negative side of the teaching. And now we come to the positive side of the teaching. So this takes as its example the instructed noble disciple. And this doesn't imply, the phrase instructed noble disciple doesn't imply that this person is already a stream enterer or one higher than a stream enterer, but it can, I think the phrase can mean any disciple who has learned the teaching of the Dhamma and is sincerely and diligently engaged in the practice of the Dhamma, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're devoting their life to full-time meditation, but they use the Dhamma as a framework for grounding their life, for understanding their life, and as a guidepost for practicing in their life. And so what happens when they're subject to old age, when they grow old, and this is interesting thing about old age, I have to say. And I'm telling you this from the perspective of one who is now getting very close to the age of 78, that you don't reach a point where you think, wow, now I've grown old. Not so long ago, maybe some of you know of Bill Bill McKibben, Bill McKibben is a writer and a climate activist, and he is the founder of the anti-climate change organization called 350.org. Well, I was watching a video of a lecture he was giving, and he said that he wrote his first book about climate change. He said 30 years ago, when I was 29 years old, I think it was, yeah. And then he said, now I'm an old man of 59. And I thought, what? An old man of 59? Come on. At the age of 59, you're just entering, you're in the middle of middle age. Yeah, and somebody told me that even when you get nowadays, even when you get into your 50s, they're referring to that as old age. But like, I'm in my late 70s and I don't think that it's old age yet. It seems to me that old age maybe begins around the age of 82 to 85. But maybe that's a delusion of the mind. And another interesting thing about old age, when you see people, and you could check with yourself to see whether you think in the same way, you see somebody who's really old, I mean, with wrinkled skin, very weak, walking with a stick, and the mind frames them in such a way that you think, ah, they've always been like that. That's their tough luck. That's just how the wheel of fate happened to turn and landed upon them in such a way that they wound up with gray hair and wrinkled skin and bent over bodies, leaning on a stick, very frail and weak. But that's not going to happen to me. I'm always going to be strong and vigorous and healthy. Yeah, so the mind sort of frames old people as if they've always been old, and we frame ourselves when we're young or even in early middle age as though we're always going to be young or in early middle age. But we don't recognize that every day we're getting older and older. And I think this is the way, yeah, maybe this is the way the mind deceives us. And every day in the morning, when we get up, we go into the bathroom to wash our face, brush the teeth, and we look in the mirror. And from day to day, we don't see any change in ourselves. So we don't see old age developing. Maybe after a certain point, you'll see a gray hair appears, or maybe a wrinkle appears in the skin that you didn't see before. But otherwise, you don't have that sense from day to day that you're growing older. But I think that might be part of the protective functioning of the mind to shield us from facing the reality of old age. It's perhaps part of the work of avijja, of ignorance. And so one of the themes that the Buddha gives us for daily, he says that whether it's a monastic or a layperson, male or female, they should often reflect thus, jara dhammomhi jaramanatito, that I am subject to old age, that I haven't gotten beyond escaped old age. And so when you reflect in this way every day, even when you're young, that I'm subject to old age, that I haven't overcome old age, then when you meet with the manifestations of old age, you can accept it with balance, with equanimity, with patience. Okay, so when the noble disciple grows old, then he reflects thus, I am not the only one who grows old, but rather all beings that come and go, pass away and take rebirth. Everything, everyone who is born, if they're going to live a full lifespan, they're subject to old age and they'll grow old. And so when you reflect in this way, then when old age comes upon you, then you don't sorrow, you don't languish, lament, and weep, beating your breast and become confused. And so in this way, you become one who has drawn out the poisonous dart of sorrow. And then the text goes up, maybe this goes a little far. It says, sorrowless, without darts, the noble disciple realizes Nibbana. But just by reflecting in this way, you can't realize Nibbana. But if you reflect on the inevitability, the inescapable nature of old age, illness, and death, then that will inspire what is called in Pali, we don't have a good word for this in English. The Pali word is sangvega, which I render a sense of urgency, a sense that you have to take urgent action in order to overcome old age, illness, and death. And when you get inspired by the sense of urgency, then you undertake the practice that leads to the realization of Nibbana. Okay, similarly now for the what is subject to illness falls ill. So if you do, again, this is a theme for regular reflection. One of the themes that the Buddha lays down, Jaradamom Dhammanatito, Vyadi Dhammom hi Vyadim Anatito, that I am subject to illness, that I have not escaped illness. So when you reflect in this way, then you fortify the mind so that when you fall ill, then you don't become overcome by sorrow, grief, and misery. In fact, there is a sutta. Let me get my note for this. It comes later in the Anguttara Nikaya in the Book of Tens. It's very famous and popular sutta in traditional Theravadan countries. It's called the Girimananda Sutta. It's in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Tens, number 60. And there's a reflection that the Buddha recommends in the sutta. It's called the perception of danger, or the perception of the pitfalls of having a physical body. And so one reflects that this body is the source of much pain and misery, and all sorts of illnesses arise in this body. And then the sutta gives us a kind of catalog of different illnesses to which the body is subject. So there's eye disease, cataracts, macular degeneration, even blindness, loss of vision, ear disease, nose disease, tongue disease, body disease, headache, mouth disease, toothache, cough, asthma, catarrh, fever, stomach ache, fainting, dysentery, gripes, cholera, leprosy, boils, eczema, tuberculosis, epilepsy, ringworm, itch, scab, chickenpox, scabies, hemorrhage, diabetes, shingles, hemorrhoids, cancer, fistula, then illnesses arising from bile, phlegm, wind, or their combination. Those are the traditional illnesses of traditional Indian medicine. Illnesses produced by the changes in the weather, illnesses produced by careless behavior, injuries caused by attack and assault, illnesses that result from karma, as well as cold and heat, hunger and thirst. Yeah, you don't have to go through all of those illnesses, but it's useful to reflect at least on some of the major types of illnesses to which this body is subject. What are the main types of illness nowadays? And what's interesting today, so many of the illnesses to which we're subject in the West are non-communicable illnesses, illnesses that arise just from careless behavior, particularly careless or unhealthy diets. So heart disease, stroke, cancer. What are some others?
Diabetes.
Diabetes, exactly. Yeah, that's what I had in my mind this morning too. Diabetes. And then also we should also add here the mental illnesses or psychological illnesses, which are not always the fault of the person, directly the fault of the person themselves. Like one of the conditions is depression. And if a person becomes depressed, it doesn't mean that they are really subject to some kind of sadness because of external events. But it seems that my understanding is that there can be biochemical mechanisms that set off depression. Michael Garrett. Yeah, there was a commentator, a news commentator, also a speechwriter, who passed away just a few days ago. His name is Michael Gerhardt.
Gerson? Michael
Gerson. Michael Gerson. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, he was a conservative commentator, and sometimes he would appear. I would see him on the PBS evening news hour, offering sort of news commentary. And he was a speechwriter for George W. Bush, but he was a devout Christian, and he gave a very beautiful, it was a sermon given at the National Cathedral, I think in 2019. And he suffered from depression, and he knew that the depression had nothing to do with the circumstances of his life. He had a loving family, a very highly respected in his profession, very successful in his career as a writer and a commentator. And yet he would get completely overwhelmed by these kind of false thoughts that nobody loves me, everybody despises me, that I'm absolutely worthless, I'm a complete failure. And so those thoughts would arise, and he would know that the thoughts are completely deceptive, complete delusions, and yet the thoughts would overwhelm him, and he would fall into this deep depression, which could last for days, even a week or so. And then when he comes out of it, then he knows that retrospectively that those thoughts were just almost like demons just taking possession of his mind. So that is the case with depression. I guess the same thing happens with bipolar condition, where people sometimes they become excited and agitated and very active, hyperactive, where they can speak very quickly, do things very quickly. They can go for days with no sleep or with minimal sleep and accomplish many things in just no time at all. That's during the phase of what they call the manic phase. Then when the depression comes, then they just get overwhelmed by this dejection, and they might be sleeping 10 or 12 hours a day, unable to do anything, no desire to do anything. And they feel that even on the brightest, sunniest day, that everything is just so dark and dismal in their life. And then that might last for a week or so. Then they come out, maybe they spend some time in the normal frame of mind. Then the excited frame takes over. And then again, they become agitated, very active. Everything seems bright and brilliant. Yeah, so it's anyway, those are also types of illness to which we're subject. Okay, and then the inevitable end is death. And this is the destiny for which we all have to prepare ourselves. And so the Buddha teaches that, again, one of the themes for constant reflection is Marana dhammom hi maranam anatito, that I'm subject to death, that I haven't escaped or overcome death. And so if you do this as a regular reflection, then you prepare your mind for when death actually arrives. Then you're able to, to face death as something like, this is what I've been preparing for throughout my life. And so now when death comes, I can greet it as almost as a friend. So for this reason, to prepare the mind for death, one of the main meditation topics in the standard list of topics is maranasati, which is the mindfulness of death or the recollection of death. And we find various ways to practice this mentioned in the suttas and in the commentaries. But I found a way, this is something that I devised on my own, but actually basing it many years ago when I was living in Kandy, in the monastery where I was staying. We had a little book called A Handbook of Mental Development, which came from the Tibetan Archives of Tibet, the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives in Dharamsala. And it had this 9-point meditation on death, which I took over and started to practice and then developed in my own way. And so the way I developed this based on that text, we have 3 main themes, and then each of these main themes is subdivided into 3 secondary themes, or 3 ways to approach the main themes. So the 3 main themes are that death is absolutely certain. Let me switch the share. Okay, I stopped sharing the Anguttara Sutta. Now I'm going to share another file. Do you see the other file?
Yes, Bhante.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we have actually 4 main themes, but 3 of them are primary. The 4th is just added at the end. And the 3 main themes have 3 divisions. So the first is that death is absolutely certain. And then the way one reinforces this on the mind through reflection is that one considers first that everyone who has lived before us has died. So we could think even those who are in positions of great power, the emperors of Rome, the Indian emperors, the Ashoka, and all of the emperors of India, of China, the emperors of Europe, all of the past presidents of the United States, of other countries, all world leaders in the past, all have, even the rich people in the past, as well as all of our, maybe some of us, if we're young, you still have a grandmother alive, but maybe your great-grandmother, great-grandfather, then great-great-grandmothers, great-great-grandfathers, going back generation after generation, all of them have died. And so I can't be an exception to this. Sometime in the future, others will look back and think, he has died she has died. So all who have lived in the past have died. The second way to confirm death is absolutely certain, you reflect upattiya sahivedang maranam agatang sada, that death comes along with birth. The moment we come out into this world, come out from the mother's womb, weeping, wah, wah, wah. Everybody, all the relatives are standing around, cheering and saying, how wonderful, a baby is born. But the wise person standing in their midst would think, now he's born, but on the way, he started that journey to death. And so when we were born, no matter how many years ago it might have been, but as soon as we were born, death came along, and death is just standing there behind us. We say, upattiya sevedang maranang agatang sada, maranataya okasang vadako via asati. So together with birth, death also comes along, trailing right behind us, like an assassin with a raised sword. So the death is always, just like our shadow follows us behind us. We can't escape our shadow. And so death is there, always trailing us from the moment we're born. Death comes along. Then the third aspect, death is absolutely certain. Every moment we are moving ever closer to death, even though we don't see it, but year by year, month by month, day by day, hour by hour, moment by moment, we're moving closer to death. It's like at dawn when the sun rises, and once we see the sun rising on the horizon, we don't see the sun moving. But if you look back 1 hour later, the sun is risen a little bit higher in the sky. You look 1 hour later, it's still higher. At midday, the sun is directly overhead. Then you look at 3 p.m., it's moving closer to the western horizon. 5 p.m., it's hovering on the western horizon. By 6 p.m. these days, the sun has vanished. So the sun, minute by minute, second by second, the sun is moving across the sky, ever closer, drawing ever closer to the sunset. And so in the same way, every year, every month, every moment, we are moving closer to death. So with these three ideas, we could confirm death is absolutely certain. But then the second main theme is the arrival of death is absolutely and utterly uncertain. And it's uncertain with regard to the time. So you can't think, okay, now I'm 20 years old. I'm in the prime of life with 30 years old. I have 40 years, 50 years, maybe 60 years ahead of me. You can't say that. We just don't know. I mean, this past week, if you follow some of the news here, very sad news in America, at University of Virginia, 3 football players, probably university age, 20, 21 or so. Didn't catch the age, but some madman with a gun shot them down. So they were probably at the age of 20, 21, looking ahead to, the remaining football games in the season, maybe professional careers as professional football players, now gone. Then in Idaho, again, very sad. I think that they were 4 college students stabbed to death in their dormitory. Yeah, so we never know the time when death is going to come. I don't want to scare or frighten anybody, but these are just things that we have to, bear in mind. And then uncertain with regard to place, could be death takes place in the hospital when we're sick, brought to the hospital, sick or injured, we die in the hospital. Could be at home, resting in our bed, the sick bed, surrounded by loved ones. Or it could be I'm crossing a street and some guy comes driving down very quickly and just mows me down. Like this happened so sadly again in this country several times. Or again, it can be somebody even here at Zhuangyan Monastery, maybe some angry guy with a machine gun with one of these 8K AR-15s comes bursting into the monastery thinking, I don't like these Buddhists coming into our country, and then starts shooting, and there goes Bhikkhu Bodhi, right here at Zhuangyan Monastery. Don't be frightened. Don't start crying.
No, Bhante, don't even say that. Don't even think it. There's too much metta for you. No.
Have to think all of these things. Okay, so uncertain with regard to place, uncertain with regard to cause. It could be that you just get really old and then you die of natural causes in old age, 85, 90, 95. Yeah, uncertain with regard to place. Maybe I just mentioned my case of my father, who was almost 99 when he passed away, just 1 month short of his 99th birthday. When I had visited him the month before, his 99th birthday was April, the end of April. I visited him. Yeah, it was March 9th, 2015. And then I left him. I was there for about 5 days on March 14th. And I said to him, I'll try to come back next month around the time of your birthday. And he said, I'm not going anyplace. I'll be here. Okay, but then 3 days later, March 17th, I got a call from my sister telling me that my father had gone out that the evening before. Or actually, I got the call from my sister the day after, but she told me the day before, on March 17th. In the evening, he had gone out. There was a little restaurant that he would like to go to about 4 blocks from his home. And then he was after he had his dinner, he was walking back to his house, and just right in the street, he collapsed. And that was it. It was very quick and gone. Okay, so that's uncertainty with regard to place, uncertainty with regard to cause. So many causes of death, natural causes, illness. I mentioned some, cancer, heart disease, stroke, could get, sadly, like 1 million people, maybe more than 1 million in the US lost their lives because of COVID. Maybe 2019 early, yeah, 2019 early, in 2020, they were looking ahead to what they were going to be doing later that year. Maybe the next year, they were planning a trip, vacation to maybe to Florida or to Mexico or to Europe. And then COVID comes along and the life is gone. So cause, we don't know. Then there are so many causes of accidents, injuries. Again, we have the crazy guns, crazy guys with guns or angry guys with guns. So many causes of death. So the cause is uncertain. So that is, the arrival of death is absolutely uncertain with regard to time, place, and cause. And then the third major theme, when death comes, we have to give up, leave behind everything. So first we have to give up, leave behind our wealth. If you're a millionaire, billionaire, you have to leave all of that behind. This makes me wonder, why do these people like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Well, Bill Gates uses his wealth in beneficial ways. But some of these others that just go on accumulating wealth, and they're going to have to leave it all behind, and yet they just accumulate more and more. They're never satisfied with what they have, but we have to give up all the wealth, all material possessions. So if you have 3 homes, maybe one in Upper New York State, one out in California, one in Florida, maybe give you another one in Switzerland. You know, you can't think I'm going to go to my Switzerland home and then I'll escape debt there. But you have to give up all of your possessions. Then the second thing is that you have to give up all your loved ones. So your husband, your wife, your children, if you're young and you die, your parents, your friends, and so on. Yeah, this one can really pull at the heart. And then you have to, when death comes, you have to give up even this body that you cling to as being mine, my body, and even your personal identity, your name, your status, your position, everything that clusters around that sense of personal identity. So all of that you have to give up. And then when death comes, from the Buddha standpoint, what is it that follows along with you as you go from this life to the life beyond? The only thing that you could bring along, this is the 4th theme, is your karma. That is your accumulation of good and bad. We should say the impressions or the seeds of your good and bad deeds, and the dispositions or propensities of character. That's what follows along when we leave this body behind. Okay, so that in brief, so that is some reflection on death. And then the next, I group these 2 together. What is subject to destruction is destroyed. What is subject to loss is lost. And when I group these together, then I think of the loss or the passing of those who are dear and beloved to yourself. And I have to add some of my own thoughts about this. Okay, so first let's see what the sutta says. So the noble disciple reflects, I am not the only one for whom what is subject to loss or destruction is lost. For all beings that come and go and so on, what is subject to loss is lost. If I were to sorrow, lament, weep, and so on, I would lose my appetite, my features would become ugly. And so on. And so when what is subject to loss is lost, he does not sorrow, weep, and become confused. So this is called an instructed noble disciple who has drawn out the poisonous dart of sorrow.
Bhante, would you like to change your share screen?
Oh, yeah, thank you for reminding me. So I go back to the 5s. Okay, so this is called the instructed noble disciple who has drawn out the poisonous dart of sorrow, pierced by which the uninstructed worldling only torments himself, and so on. Yeah, I wanted to add like some comments on this, because I think there's a certain unwholesome tendency in Buddhist circles for people when they lose loved ones to think that they should bear it sort of with complete equanimity and without any sorrow or grief. And so they suppress the natural tendency to feel sorrow and grief. And if they feel sorrow and grief, then they feel guilty that they're not good practitioners. And then they blame themselves and demean themselves for not being true practitioners, good practitioners. But I have some different thoughts about this. I feel that maybe like this is an ideal for an arhat, but for us who are ordinary people, if we lose those who are very close to us, dear to us, particularly if it's an untimely loss, somebody close to us who passes away when they're maybe in the prime of life, or when they have at least many years of potentially fulfilling life ahead of them. So in that case, I feel that it's natural to feel sorrow and grief, and that one should let oneself feel that sorrow and grief, but one does so mindfully and reflectively. And so one brings in the reflection that it is inevitable that whoever comes into this world is subject to pass away, that we never know the time or circumstances of their passing. And so when you reflect in that way, it helps to, let us say, to mitigate the force or power of the sorrow, so that you don't get crushed by sorrow and grief. But it's part of the, I would say, the natural healing process in dealing with loss, the loss of a loved one, to allow oneself to experience that sorrow and grief, to experience it consciously, mindfully, even, I would say, to plunge into it and to let yourself go, to let yourself drift into it. But at the same time, you're mindful that I am experiencing sorrow, I'm experiencing grief, and you're reflective. You have sampajanya, clear comprehension that it's inevitable that there will be the loss of loved ones, that there has to be parting and separation from all who are dear and beloved to ourselves. And so when you do this, even though you can't say that you've completely removed the dart of sorrow, but I say in that case, this dart of sorrow isn't poisonous, but it's part of the process of, let's say, of dealing with the loss of loved ones. Okay, so then just concluding, the sutta says, these are the 5 situations unobtainable by any ascetic, Brahmin, Deva, Mara, or Brahma, or by anyone in the world. Okay, maybe we should take some questions, and the way, or comments, and the way to ask question or to make a comment is by using the raise hand symbol. Okay, Fred. Fred?
Thank you, Bhante. And thank you for these teachings every Saturday.
Oh, thank you.
You gave us a reference for the term samvega,
Yeah.
you defined as a sense of urgency, and the Anguttara Nikaya section 10. Could you give us that full reference again, please?
Yeah. For the Girimananda Sutta, it's the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of 10, Sutta number 60.
Good.
But that deals with 10 themes of contemplation. That doesn't deal with Samvega itself. Samvega, there are a number of suttas, but I don't.
Yes, I think
I don't remember any concise suttas on Samvega.
Yeah, I was just after the reference. I wasn't expecting it to define it necessarily, but
Yeah.
I know it from art history when it's defined somewhat as aesthetic shock, like a brilliant sunrise or sunset
Yeah.
at times too. So I understand the compatibility with urgency.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Jignasa in India, I believe.
Yes, Bhante.
Okay.
Wow.
So, Bhante, I wanted to ask this in the practical, application. Like right now, my uncle is in ICU,
Yeah.
and he's led a reasonably pious life.
Yeah.
But now and quite an equanimous life. But right now he knows that he's gonna die.
Yeah.
And he is not equanimous right now. So at times he's like, okay, I know this life is no longer gonna be like, serving me, so I better die. He knows that, and like he's ready for to die. But
Yeah.
at the same time, sometimes he says, I want to live.
He says-
So he's kind of lost his balance, emotional balance. So how do we like encourage him to now be equanimous and yet sensitive about it? How do we do that with him, with all the love, all the metta? How do we like gently help him to kind of sail through this phase?
Yeah. If he is really aware that death is coming, this is a method that's used commonly in Sri Lanka with Buddhist people who are already firmly, have a firm belief in karma and karma causation. So I assume you said your uncle has lived a pious life, and so he would be a believer in karma and its fruits. Would that be correct?
Yes, Bhante.
Example. So what they would do is to remind the person who is coming to the end, remind that person of their good deeds, the good deeds that they've performed in their life. And that they should encourage the person to rejoice that they've performed these good deeds. And then think that since they've done these good deeds, then even though death comes, you have to leave behind the body, but the good deeds are going to be sort of your support, like the wings, the angel wings that carry you to a good destination in the future. So you could try that with your uncle.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
when he gets into the mood of sort of clinging to life and sort of resenting the fact that he's going to die, you have to play it by ear, since you would know your uncle better than I do.
But you have more wisdom, Bhante. I am like stupid, that way.
I would say, okay, if he's clinging to life, maybe just remind him. You don't have to make it seem that death is inevitable, but tell him that if you come back to life, you recover your health, that will be good and excellent. But if you have to pass away, then remember the good deeds that you've done, and that there's nothing to be fearful about in death, that you have a good destination ahead of you, a bright destination. And then also encourage him that in order to ensure that he'll have a good passage during the transition, that he should discard any kind of fear of death and just have a confidence that he's going to have a smooth passage. Yeah, I would say you could try that.
Okay. And any way, as family members, I'm quite like equanimous, and I was like, let's now use every moment to like live it more beautifully right now. Like I said to all my cousins and all, like we should not like lament and all that. Rather just, obviously we are going to feel a little, there are going to be moments where we all are going to feel a little sensitive about it. We are going to miss him. But I tell him, let's take it a little lightly. And is it the right approach, Bhante?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that is exactly what the Buddha is recommending. That, and what I said is that it would be quite natural and normal for your family members, especially those who are in the immediate family of your uncle, to feel that sorrow or grief. And so just let them experience the sorrow and grief. Don't try to tell them you shouldn't be sorrowful, you shouldn't feel any grief, but just, tell them that feel the grief, feel the sorrow, but we have to recognize that this is part of the the natural life process, that when we're born, we have to pass away. And then also remind the family members that your uncle led a good, pious life. And so he's certain to meet with a good destination in the future.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, okay.
Feel more and more grateful, you know, and just good luck that I just came across you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Next will be Fungru. Fungru.
Good morning,
Good
Bhante.
morning.
I don't have a question, but I would like to officially obtain your permission to use two things. One is on my deathbed, could I borrow your boyish, mischievous giggling, and also borrow the quote that you once said, "The cause of my death is birth."
I don't quite know what you mean by borrowing my giggling.
I love your boyish giggling and mischievous giggling when you talk about death and birth and death. And I will tell people where I got that when I do
Okay,
that.
try to do that then.
Yes, I'll try to do that on my deathbed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but the statement that the cause or condition for death is birth, that's not from me. That is actually Jati Pachaya Jara Maranang. That's from the formula of dependent origination, that old age and death is conditioned by birth.
Yes, but I heard from you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. One more. We just take the last question. This is from Gita. Or
Thank you,
comment.
Bhante. Thank you for all your teachings. Yeah, it's actually a comment that I wanted to share. When my dad was dying, he was in ICU hooked up to a machine. The nurse whispered in my ear, although he's unconscious, he can hear everything you would say to him. So we knew the doctor said there's no point operating because he had had a massive stroke, like the brain was bleeding, right? What I told my dad was, because I knew, I didn't want him to suffer. Same thing with my mom. I told them both, if it comes time to go, just let go. I told my dad, because I think his biggest concern, the reason people cling at that moment of death is because of attachment to family, I find, right? Because they don't want to let go of their loved ones. So I knew his biggest sadness was my mom. He didn't want to leave her because they were like two peas in a pod. They were inseparable, and like milk and water, they mixed together. So I told my dad, Mom is going to be okay. We're going to take care of her, and that's my promise to you. And then I told him all the grandkids and the kids are doing well, that it's okay to go. I think they wait for that permission. Even my mom was like, my mom's more Buddhist, so I was able to establish her in the meditative sort of thing. But with my dad, it put his mind to ease.
Yeah, I think that's important to put the mind.
Important.
Yeah, I think that could
very important.
Also be useful advice for Jignasa with her uncle. Yeah. So just
you have to comfort them. Yeah. Because the last moments of death, right?
Yeah.
Like in my mom's case, I know she's okay because, my daughter was right by her side and, she had a very peaceful death because she knew, right? Every time she went into a convulsion, I said, Mom, this is impermanent. Let go. Right. And I told her, think about meditation, think about, the heavenly realms, think about ending suffering. So I was able to bring her mind back because she had consciousness. Even though people wanted to give her drugs to sedate her, I said no. I wanted her to be fully conscious and aware to direct her mind. And I was guiding her in that direction. But with my dad, because he was unconscious, I just whispered in his ear and I told him that. I think that's very, very important. So I just want to share that.
Yeah, I think the mind could register that even though you seem to be unconscious.
Exactly.
Yeah, I had a friend years ago in Sri Lanka. There was another Buddhist monk from Switzerland. He had gone into a coma. He had a kind of condition came and he went into a coma. We actually thought he was going to die. He was hooked up to these machines. And, we were preparing his funeral already. But then he recovered and came out. And he told us that, or he told me that even though he was in a coma, but he knew everything that was going on around him. And he told me even he knew on a particular day that I had visited him, even though I couldn't speak to him. or he couldn't, I spoke to him, but he couldn't even, register that I was talking to him. But he told me that he was aware of that, even though from a medical point of view, he was in a coma.
Yes, but even Ajahn Brahm, he was almost dying, and he relayed the whole story. And
really?
yeah,
Recently,
and Ajahn,
recently.
no, not recently. This was when he was ordained, right? And he got a malaria, and he thought he was not going to make it. And then Ajahn Chah came to him and gave him the courage and the strength to recover, and he fully recovered. He still has residual side effects from it. Even I think even to this day he has to be careful with his health, but he thought he was dying. He was, he said he was almost at his deathbed until Ajahn Chah came and talked to him and encouraged him. And with that one visit, within days he recovered. But it was a really, really bad situation.
I didn't know
He was
about that.
describing it. Yeah. So yeah, if they're going to live and they are young and they have the strength and they can battle it, absolutely. But if they're old and why do you want them to come back to more suffering, right? So
that is
important, right?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll have to end now. So I'll end with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits with the devas, the nagas or dragon spirits, the bhutas, the fair spirits. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang ragantu sasanam. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang ragantu desanam. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang ragantu mang parang. Dukkha pata chani dukkha, baya pata chani baya, soka pata chani soka, hantu sabepi panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all beings also be thus. And then we go sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu.
sadhu.
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante Bodhi. Thank you, Bhante Bodhi.
Thank you,
Okay, thank
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante Bodhi. Be safe.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
so much.
Bhante.
Be well.
Take care
Thank
of your
you.
health.
Okay,
Be
thank
safe,
you.
Bhante.
you,
Take
Bhante.
care. Have a
Okay,
good lunch.
Bye. See you soon.
Bye,
Thank
Bhante.
you,
Okay,
Bhante.
thank you.
See you
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Be safe.
Wonderful
Okay.
teaching.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay,
Bye,
take care.
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good.